Okay, we're back. Rabbi Nir, welcome.
Shalom, Shifra. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you also. I've been hearing about you for such a long time.
Same here.
Exciting opportunity. So let me officially introduce you, and then we can start. Rabbi Nir Menussi is an Israeli author, speaker, and teacher who writes and lectures extensively in both English and Hebrew. He tackles a wide variety of topics from psychology and feminism to science and media, elucidates them from a Jewish Hasidic perspective, mystical perspective. He's known for his clear, creative style and his ability to explain deep concepts in an accessible and entertaining way. Entertaining is awesome. And the topic here is rectifying your past and future selves, which is pretty intriguing. So thank you so much for being with us, and very
Thank
excited.
you for having me.
Where are you physically in Israel?
I'm physically in a little green town known as Ra'anana. It's a sort of in-between place. I grew up in Tel Aviv. I spent half of my life, 24 years, in Jerusalem. And now we're here for a while and going back to Tel Aviv, full circle in the summer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you like
where I grew up?
Were you brought up Torah observant, or were you like a beach board?
I grew up ultra Orthodox secular.
Meaning?
Ultra secular.
You were super secular. You were ultra right wing secular. Wow. Yeah, Tel Aviv is known for that. Tel Aviv is known for that. Okay. He said Ra'anana, yeah. Okay, so I know that you want to share some of your personal story, and now we're all ears, so maybe we can start with that.
Okay. So so your topic is miracles and metamorphosis. So it's a good opportunity for me also to go back to a few miracles that I was fortunate, lucky, blessed to experience. I don't experience them in the same sort of energy that I had before, but it was enough to get me going. So anyway, I'll tell the story. So I grew up in a very, very secular home in Tel Aviv. My mother actually grew up in a ultra-Orthodox family, but she left. My father grew up in a kibbutz, so he was already past the the great
ultra secular,
the great rift, and he loved the Tanakh, the Bible, very much. Hebrew. He was a well-known person here in Israel. He was a writer. He was a political satirist. Would write in the paper. And I grew up in this very, very secular home. Just to give an example, we had no holidays. We had no mezuzah. So when I was entering my second grade, we moved to a bigger home, and my parents designed the home, and then they gave a tour. Whenever someone came, they gave a tour, and the tour began at the front door, surprisingly enough, and always began with the same sentence: "As you can see, there's no mezuzah in our home." Up until then, I didn't know what a mezuzah was, but I learned from this that it must be a very important thing that you need to make sure that you don't have it.
Wow.
So that was the kind of home that I grew up in. And it was a very cultural home, classical music and literature, and my father would travel all over the world. And I now say that it was open to all, all corners of the earth, but not to the heavens. It was very very wide. There was anything but Judaism, basically, in this home.
I don't know, probably a lot of people are surprised by this. This is, and maybe you can speak to it just a drop at some point, but this is Israel. Israel has this, and it's shocking when you first come here. Like I heard,
there's a kind of
there are Jews in Israel that never heard of Abraham, the patriarch.
Yeah, that's more extreme, but it's true that there's a kind of secularism here. In a way, people have this feeling that if I'm here in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel, and I'm an Israeli citizen, and I'm an Israeli by identity, it's sort of a substitute for my Judaism. You don't have that abroad. And then, and even very secular people abroad would have some connection. They would go to shul, synagogue, at least in the high holidays and so on. And here you can be in that extreme. That's where I was. So I grew up, and I had a love of science fiction and the love of science subsequently, and then a love of philosophy. And then I became even more secular because I became a more learned secular. So it was, I started believing very much in evolution, and scientific materialistic explanations would be religion for me. Basically, they would explain everything. They would give me the creation myth and an explanation for everything that there is in the world, especially evolution. And then, well, it's a long story. I'm gonna focus on some major sort of moments. But at some point, I left Israel. I went to England, then New York to study art, and then I did realize over there that I was trying to be cosmopolitan a little bit too soon. Maybe, I don't know. I have no idea where I'm coming from. I met people from all over the world, and I would quiz them. I would ask them about their own cultures, and they didn't know anything to tell me because they were just like me. They were sort of very young, very liberal, people, and they knew nothing. And I was angry at them for not being able to tell me anything about, African culture and Indian culture, and they didn't know anything. And I was angry. And in my head, I went like, you're a bunch of spoiled liberal kids who only know contemporary popular culture and you don't know anything else until one of the Indian girls asked me, what can you tell me about Judaism? All I know about Judaism is I saw this picture of a boat with animals coming into that boat by pairs. That's all I know, but can you tell me anything else? So then I realized that I do need to go a little bit back. I came back to Israel and I went to Jerusalem, which I always loved because it had history. And I felt that it had layers of meaning and a more varied population. And I started studying history and philosophy. And then really the story begins at the second year of the university. And I was in this very ultra-secular place, maybe a little bit more curious about Judaism, but only slightly. And then, so it's a funny story. It goes like this. So when I grew up on Darwin, right? And there's this famous picture of the monkeys that go and evolve and become bigger and bigger until they get to...
They're bent, right?
Yeah.
We've all seen that.
And now in my mind, between the biggest ape and the human being, there was another figure, which was the religious man. The religious man was somewhere between the ape and the human being, right? In my mental eyes. So I come into this class, and so in the university there were many religious people in Jerusalem, but there were the kind of religious people that I felt that they were tame monkeys, that they would shave their fur and they would put their tails in their pants, and they wouldn't talk about it. They were very nice and polite, and I felt they're almost normal. And they didn't anger me, but they also didn't challenge me in any way. And then I go into this class and I see this monkey that's free. He's outside of the cage. He has payos. He has a big kippah. He has the tzitzit coming out of his. And so immediately I dislike him. And I feel that this is someone that I need to stay away from. But I was coming late into this class, and I wanted to find someone that does good summaries of what the teacher was saying, because I missed a couple of classes. And it turns out this very religious guy, who I didn't know what he was doing there, studying history of science, he wrote very clearly. I looked over his shoulder and I saw that he writes very well and very neatly. So I took his note. I asked him if I can take his notebook and Xerox it. There was Xerox back then, as you remember. And I went and Xeroxed it. And then I went over it, and it was a good summary of the classes that I missed. But on the side, he would write very, very, very mysterious notes. And the notes would be about the Kabbalistic Sefirot, and about his rabbi said this and that. And this was a class about the history of science. So the religious people that I knew, it was like a split for them. They would study whatever it was we were studying in the university, and then they would say, well, I have to go daven. They went davening, and then they came back, and then we spoke about whatever it was that we were studying. But for him, it was all coming together in some way in his notebook. He had this other world that was mystical and spiritual and intriguing that I heard about, as a kind of curiosity, but not as something people actually believe in, this Kabbalistic Sefirot ideas. And so that intrigued me, and we started speaking. And each conversation, my image that you can't be both religious and very intelligent, I'm sorry to say that's how I saw things, but that image sort of began to sort of crumble. And the image that you can have both worlds and they really connect in a deep way. And I felt that he has something I totally don't have. He has this access to this very, very deep sort of spiritual knowledge and ideas. And I found very intriguing. But at some point, I decided that I'm going to not be polite anymore. I asked him if he grew up religious. He said he did grow up religious, but he became more religious than his parents and more Hasidic. I didn't know what Hasidut was. He started telling me. And at some point, I said, well, enough politeness. I need to tell him what I think about his worldview. So I told him, listen, his name was Moshe. He's a bit famous now in the English-speaking world. His name is Moshe Genus. You can look him up on YouTube.
Oh,
that's him. He was my personal Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's him. Yeah, much younger. We're talking 25 years ago. So even more, I think. So I told him, listen, you're a nice guy and everything, but you grew up religious, meaning that from the moment you were born, if a holy book fell to the ground, they will be kissed. If you go to the shul, you lift up the Torah book. You're basically, I think you're conditioned. You've been conditioned to view the Torah as other than a book written by humans or human beings. You're conditioned into this. And you grew up with this, and so you can't, but for me, I'm, I don't have this conditioning, so I can see very clearly, very lucidly, that this is a human book, a very human book. It's obviously it has wisdom. I'm not saying it doesn't. It wouldn't have survived all these centuries if it wouldn't have wisdom, but it's a human book, and it's very clearly human because it has repetitions, that it has contradictions, and it's a human book, and that's it. And so I think that's it. You're a product of your education, which made you believe in this, and you can't, get rid of it, of this point of view. So he listened, and then he said, and for me, there was no way on earth to answer this sort of query. It was either he would have no answer, or he would be grateful and take off his kippah and go whatever. And he said, yeah, you're right. It does have to do with education. And then he said, it's a bit like musical hearing. If you haven't been trained to develop a kind of refined musical hearing, then two sounds that are different may sound the same to you. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And it would be harder to develop that kind of education or gain that kind of listening at a later age. It's easier when you get it from an early age, like musical hearing. That's all he said. And then he said, I have to run. And he sort of left. And I remember being planted to the ground, because came completely out of the left field for me. It basically what he said, he didn't spell it out. He didn't try to convince me. He didn't, stay there until I was convinced. He gave me a totally new perspective. And basically the perspective was that maybe I thought that I was the one who's lucidly seeing things as they are, and he was imagining something, conditioned to believe something that's imaginary. He told me, maybe I'm hearing something that you're not hearing. Maybe you are tone deaf. He didn't say those words, right, but that's what came out of his parable, of his metaphor, that maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's bizchut, by virtue of my education, I can hear that the Torah has a different sound than other books, regular books. And for you, it sounds the same. So that was shocking for me.
You realized that at that moment.
Sorry?
You realized that at that moment.
Well, I realized that's what he meant, but the implications were shocking. The implications was that maybe I'm, colorblind or tone deaf to something. Maybe for me, growing up secular, I thought that we seculars were the sane majority, and the religious people were the exception to the rule, or the minority that they have to explain themselves. And suddenly he sort of turned the whole tables around for me in that one sentence. It didn't change my life immediately, but it suddenly opened a possibility in my head that maybe the religious people, the mystics and the spiritual people and the Jews in particular were seeing something that I'm not seeing. Now, what happened was that this started sort of kind of dominoes, falling. And more, I had more conversations with him. Each conversation was very, very interesting, and again, gave me sort of another perspective on things. This was probably the most important one, but there were quite a few. And all this led to, at first, a kind of crisis. Why the crisis was that I was holding on to this very, very materialistic worldview that says that there's no meaning, there's only matter and energy and indifferent laws of physics. And that means that ultimately nothing has meaning. There are only pockets of meaning that we create, and they're going to be washed over at some point. And then what happened was, I believed this ever since I knew myself, but it was as if someone sort of turned on the volume, and this sort of background hum became like a roar that I couldn't stand. I felt the world was disintegrating in real time, and everything was falling apart, and then we'll all be extinct, like the dinosaurs, basically. And I always believed that this was like a background hum, but suddenly it was unbearable, and I couldn't bear it. And then I found myself in this kind of existential, crisis. I didn't know why I'm getting up in the morning, why I'm going to the university. And I went to psychologists, naively enough. I went to psychologists because I couldn't sleep. And I had this kind of anxiety attacks that were very weird because they weren't directed at any one particular thing. It was just general anxiety because I felt that everything was crumbling.
Yes.
And then they asked me, about my father and my mother, and I told them, yeah, it's like everyone. There's some good things and bad things, but that's not the thing. It's not what I'm going through. It's not psychological. It's theological. I tried to tell them that, but they couldn't handle it. And then came the first miracle. So this is the first miracle. I want to talk about two miracles that for me sort of sparked metamorphosis, and especially the second one. I think is something that I want to give like an insight out of the second one to everyone here. But I'll start with the first one. So the first one was a dream. And I have to tell that part of this crisis was that suddenly I had a very mysterious rash all over my body. It was a very strange rash. It was almost all over my body. It was itchy as hell. Nobody could explain it. I went to the skin doctors and they sort of looked at me, and it was very obvious. It was completely spiritual, psychosomatic going on. But of course, they wouldn't ask me anything about, the psychologist would ask me about my mother and father, and the dermatologist would ask me about whatever. When did this start? And then I had a dream. So the dream was that I'm going in the university where I would spend every day, and all of a sudden there's an elevator that isn't there in real life. It's a new elevator, standing in the middle of the cafeteria where I would spend all the the breaks. And so I'm curious. I walk into this elevator, and there's a bunch of people. The elevator closes, and then it starts plummeting down for minutes on end. Plummeting and plummeting, and I have this nausea, and it plummets until finally, after several moments, it gets somewhere and it opens, and it's another world. It's like, Narnia or Alice in Wonderland. And I mean, I read those fantasy books when I was a kid, like many people, and suddenly it was real, and it was a very real dream, very vivid dream. It was very real. It was very clear that there is really another world. And that
was
this
it a psychedelic looking world, or was it what?
No. So the thing is, there were green hills, but the thing is, there was a compound, a very small compound around the elevator, a bit like a train station. It wasn't very big, and I wasn't allowed out of that. So I got access to a new world, but I was limited to a tiny little compound with a fence around that elevator. And I went to the guards, I went to the gate. I wanted to start exploring this amazing world. Who knows what fantastical beings and wizards, whatever there are. And I didn't know. And they said, you can't pass. You need a pass. You need to show us a permit or a pass. I told them, but I don't have a permit. It says, you need to get one. I told them, how do I get one? They said, I don't know. You figure it out yourself. We're just the guards, but you need a pass. You can't get out of this compound. You can use the elevator whenever you want, but you can't leave this compound. So I do the elevator again, few times. And then I see someone, I tell them, isn't this amazing, this elevator that's a bridge to another world? And he looks at me and says, oh, I'm just taking the elevator because it burns calories. And I look at him as if he's totally crazy. So I do this elevator trip, and then I woke up and I ran to the bathroom, and I physically, literally threw up because of the nausea of the elevator plummeting. I physically threw up. And then something very, very strange came to my mouth. And so I had a girlfriend and she was very scared. And then she said, and then she came up, she says, what happened, what's going on? And then I said something that I would never have believed that I would say. It just came out of my mouth. I said, all this is happening. I know it's why all this is happening, the rash and the crisis and the confusion. It's all because I'm shedding my skin. So I can't really say that I said that sentence because it's such a weird thing to say for me at that time, that I'm shedding my skin. Almost, I felt like almost later on, I thought it's like a bit like a butterfly coming out of the cocoon. And this whole thing was the cocoon between the caterpillar and the... So that was the first sort of kind of mystical experience that was life-changing. And in many ways, from that moment on, mystical language, religious language, spiritual language, which I was very much anti, it turned, this is the philosopher William James said it, it became from a dead wire to a live wire. It suddenly meant something. I could come up to a spiritual book and it would use the word soul, and I didn't mock that word anymore because I knew what it meant. It would talk about mystical worlds or even God, and I knew what it all meant. It was almost overnight. And that sparked a whole year of sort of new agey explorations that were not focused on Judaism. It wasn't focused on anything. It was just going everywhere and exploring everything and trying all kinds of meditations. And it was this very intense year. And then what happened was that I figured at some point, I realized, and many teachers, even in the East, they say this, you need a path. You can't roam, aimlessly. And I realized I need to focus on something. But of course, Judaism was at the bottom of the list, basically, of what I would focus on, right? Because I didn't like it. And but I started thinking maybe I shouldn't, and which religion or tradition I should focus on. And then came the second event. And this is a far more interesting one in many ways. It was almost exactly a year after the elevator dream, which really changed me from a materialist to a spiritualist, let's say. And this is what connected me in a way to Judaism. And so it went like this. I think, by the way, it was this time of year because I think it had to do with the Holocaust. Now, yesterday, if you don't know, in Israel, we commemorate the Holocaust Day, the Holocaust Memorial Day. So it was Friday night, right? Leil Shabbat. For me, it was Friday night. A friend of mine had a birthday party. And I walked to the birthday, but there's no buses on Shabbat. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a bicycle. I think it was broken. So I found myself walking. And I walked. It was this kind of, spring night. And it was quite a walk. And I walked, and, my thoughts were sort of roaming and wandering. And then it got to the Holocaust for some reason, just, train of thought sort of going all kinds of directions. And then I was in the Holocaust. Then all of a sudden I had a certain sort of person sort of emerged in my mind, who was a German Jew between the two world wars, very similar to me, assimilating home. Maybe his grandfather was observant, but he was very German for him in his own eyes.
This was an image that you were relating to, not somebody that...
Yeah, very. I related totally. I felt that I could have been him, at that time, and very same. And he was very bewildered by the Nazis coming into power. And I sort of looked at the world through his eyes. It was a sort of fast motion, sort of.
It's just a spontaneous experience as you're walking.
Yeah, just thinking. So I'm imagining him and I'm going along with it, and I'm sort of seeing the world through his eyes, and he's totally bewildered. And he can't understand why Germany is betraying him, and why this tiny movement becomes this massive movement, and suddenly he finds himself in the ghetto and so on. And I go all the way to the concentration camp.
Wow.
And all the way to the gas chamber, and all the way to the end. And I sort of see the world through his eyes, and he dies. And then all the way to the end, which is really made me stop short as I was walking, because it was so weird to get all the way to that point. And he died in the same kind of bewilderment, that thinking, but I'm not a Jew. I'm a human being. This identity is not something I chose. It's not something I identify with. And it's basically been forced upon me by anti-Semites. And he died meaninglessly in his own eyes. And at that moment, I had a kind of very simple realization, which was that there are some things in life that you don't choose, you don't necessarily identify with, and yet they're the most meaningful thing about you in a way, and you can even die for them. And it's up to you if you know what's going on or if you don't know what's going on. You can die, you can go all the way, you can live your entire life not being connected to this, and then you would die not understanding what's going on, or you could understand it. But it has to do with realizing that some things you don't choose, but they're part of you. And that was Judaism. Because I had the same experience. I felt that I was just a human being. I was a cosmopolitan, universal person, which happened to be Jewish or happened to have this kind of history, but it's not mine because I didn't choose it. But that suddenly flipped it. So what if you don't choose it? It's part of you and it's meaningful even if you don't choose it. So that was, anyway, that's not the end of the story. That's the not weird part. So I brushed the thoughts aside and I went on. And I got to the birthday party. And there were a bunch of people, my closest friends. And it was, Friday nights, listening to jazz music, smoking, and making pasta. And as it happens, it only later on did I realize that it just so happened that I didn't do anything that you can't do on Shabbat because I don't smoke and I didn't cook and I wasn't in charge of changing the CDs, on the player. And I walked. But of course,
Wow.
I didn't think about that at all. I was just sitting there. And it was my circle of friends, my best friends. And they were, making jokes and everything was great. And I look at them and I was quiet. They were talking and I was quiet. And then the very, very weird thing happened. And the very weird thing happened that all of a sudden, and this wasn't because I was on a train of thought leading there. It just really sort of out of nowhere, another Jew, another Jew from history popped into my head.
Gosh.
But this time it wasn't a few decades into the past. It was a few centuries into the past. It was 300 years ago. It was an ultra-Orthodox Eastern European Jew. The other one was Western, obviously German, Western European. This was an Eastern European Jew, Haredi, Chassid, with the whole thing. But this time it was the other way around. He was looking at the world through my eyes. He was sort of set within me and saw the world. It was like the reverse of the other experience. And this was for me, out of nowhere. I was sitting there and suddenly I felt him. I saw him. I could almost see him. I felt him. And he was sort of sitting within me and looking at the world he was getting a picture of the future, 300 years into the future, of Jews in the land of Israel. And his first impression, I felt what he was feeling. So his first impression was, wow, Jews are in Israel and they're living beautiful, wonderful lives. And they're not persecuted and they have beautiful homes. And this is unbelievable. I can't believe that this is the Eretz Israel, the land of Israel of the future. But then a moment later, he realized it was Shabbat. And then his heart broke. And I could feel his heart break. It wasn't my heart breaking because I didn't care about Shabbat, but he cared very much about Shabbat. And his heart broke. And I could feel his heart breaking in a sort of very deep way. The whole thing lasted a few, maybe seconds, and then it disappeared. But at that moment, I felt that I glimpsed something that immediately I was in a little bit in a different place than all of my friends and who I was, beforehand. And suddenly I realized that there's something very deep going on here, something very meaningful and it's a whole universe of emotions and experiences and things that are not, vaguely spiritual, but they have to do with the details of the Torah and the Shabbat and this whole thing, all the particularity of Judaism I didn't like. But suddenly I saw it from a different perspective because it was so authentic for this person whom I didn't know and who suddenly sort of came into my head.
Do you believe that these are past incarnations of you, or did you speculate?
I didn't think about it at all.
Since then, you must have thought about it.
Yeah. So the end of the story is that I'm talking this year, it was less than a year ago.
Wow.
I had, so Moshe Genuth, who's the one who made in the university, and he opened everything up. And we had the first amazing conversations about everything. And he's still a good friend. And then we were in Shabbat together. I think it was about a year ago, or maybe less again. And then his son, who's 18 now, asked me about my story, about how the whole story. And I started telling him. And then I realized that I never told my friend Moshe about what I just told you about this evening.
Gosh.
It turns out I never told him that. I don't know why. I never told him that.
Were you speaking? Do you go around telling the story? Is it like you're saying?
Every once in a while. I try to tell it not too often. There's something about it, a very profound story that's meaningful to you. If you tell it too much,
Right.
the story sort of replaces the memory in some way.
Yes, 100%.
So I try to be a little bit stingy in how much I tell it.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Well, Miracles and Metamorphosis, it was very evocative, a headline. So I told around the table, and I told Moshe, I never told you this, right? And he says, no, you haven't. And I told this whole thing. And then Moshe looked at me and he says, you realize that all of them were you. And honest to God, I never thought about that. Seriously, never occurred to me.
What did you think? Go ahead.
I thought that it was, the first one definitely I felt was a figment of my own imagination because I conjured him up, voluntarily. The second one, I in a way, if it's like, whether it was a psychological manifestation of my own, whatever, collective unconscious, or whether it was actually a mystical experience, is an open question which I don't see a point in answering, because it's right. In many ways it's the same. But he suddenly said it was very clearly all you. It was you in past lives. And when he said that, that made me realize something that I never thought about before. Which was, and then he went on, Moshe, and he said, sometimes when we're praying, and we don't know what we're praying for, because we are, 3 times a day, it's not every prayer, to say the least, is something the most meaningful, experience there is, with the that you intend every word, and when it's a routine, it's sometimes it's more rare when that happens than when it doesn't. It says sometimes when you pray, you have no idea you're praying for yourself in another point in space-time.
Wow.
You're praying. So that was something incredible for me as a thought. Maybe I'm not just praying for myself. Maybe I'm right now helping out across time and space. Myself in the past, could be in the past in this life. Maybe I'm now sending a message or sending a beacon of hope and help to my child me, who's looking at the world and not understanding why it seems to be meaningless. Or maybe even sending even further back to another point in history. And then it can also be the other way around, that you're sending messages to your future self, or you're drawing upon.
I just have to tell you that the previous speaker is coming from a completely different place, also talked about past and future selves, which is randomly. So, okay, please continue. There's definitely some strong message here.
Yeah.
So how do you draw from, say more about the future self, because I really actually don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't understand it fully, but I'm sort of continuing from this sort of line of thought. So if I think about that 17th century Orthodox older Jew who sort of came and sort of visited me and inhabited me for a few moments, in a way he was kind of projecting himself into the future. Maybe he was also sort of playing with his head, I wonder what Judaism would be like in the future. And it doesn't matter if it's fully conscious and in a sort of mystical way that you think about tzaddikim, that they're doing things intentionally, or it's something that is, almost subconsciously, or when you're distracted, when you're not thinking about something. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that for me, what happened was taking this thought that this was a past life or a past instance of me. He was kind of projecting a message into my future self that changed my life, that opened my eyes in some deep way. And maybe we can do the same. So for me, we can take this on a mystical level, and we can take this on a more grounded level. On a mystical level, we can say that maybe when you're praying and when you're going through something hard, it could be that you're helping out a past self, and it could be that you're helping out a future self. Helping out a past self means that maybe there's an experience you have to go through, a tikkun, a rectification you have to go through, and these and Kabbalah, the Arizals, right? Rabbi Isaac Luria's Kabbalistic tracts about Gilgulim, he talks about this all the time, that people come back for a new incarnation because they need to fulfill something or fill a gap that was missing from a previous life. And sometimes it's that could explain tragedies that happen to you, or things you don't understand, or hardships that you're going through. And you have no idea. By the way, the Hasidic approach is not to sort of delve in and try to figure out what the Gilgulim are. I don't think it's a healthy thing to do. I think you can really get lost in trying to pinpoint, who I was. And there are many stories about Hasidic masters who even prayed that they would not have this ability to see past and future lives. There's a famous story about the Alter Rebbe that he went to be a student of the Maggid of Mezrich, and not someone else. Someone else could teach him about Gilgulim and incarnations, and he says, "Yeah, but I want to learn how to pray. I want to be a Tamim Jew, a sincere, wholehearted, to work with a pure heart." And that's far more important than delving in. On the other hand, there are stories about Gilgulim, and their message is that you never see the full picture until you realize that your lifespan is far, far greater than the little sort of, the little, bandwidth, the narrow bandwidth of what you're seeing right now. So
which is such extreme application to healing also, because Hasidus tells us that full embodiment, and especially in a mimer from the Rebbe, Borinif Sifasayim, he talks about how full embodiment, the soul is absolute health, and the soul can't be fully embodied if so much of it is elsewhere.
Yeah.
This may be the time where we do need to connect with all of our Gilgulim, and I also wonder if some of them if we have more than one at a time. But I know that's not the topic, but I've started to get curious about that.
So as I said, I think there's one way to think about it in a mystical way, that you're actually maybe sending out or receiving energy from maybe a higher station in your past or future biography. And you can also think about it in more, let's say, more rational or down-to-earth terms, which is, let's say something like this. If we believe, if you're in a state of hardship or conflict, and things are unclear, and you don't know how they're going to pan out, and you don't, and we have this every once in a while in our lives, because that's how life is. And so someone once told me a very similar idea. He told me, right now it's very hard. With something financial, very complicated, and it's so much uncertainty. And he told me, inhale from the future. Take a breath from the future, because it's going to work out in the end. Or you believe it's going to work out in the end. And if you believe that and you're connected to that, that's almost like connecting to a future self who is looking back, is telling the story of how I went through this maze of uncertainty and how I had this and that crisis, but it all turned out for the good or for the best. And we've all felt it in things that we've been through and that have been resolved. Right. So we can extrapolate it's going to happen again. But now you have to connect to that future, healthier, more elevated sort of self that's rising above the situation, and you can inhale. It's almost like a long pipe, and you connect to wherever he is or she is, that person is, and you're inhaling that. And also, I think it's a healing process to do something similar to your past self. So if you're carrying with you a wound from a previous relationship or from a previous point in your life, or something from your childhood that's hard, that you've been through, it's not over. all these stations in time are sort of interconnected in your soul, in this kind of spiritual level, and you can reach out to them and you can send them sort of messages of hope, of guidance, of resilience.
Past versions of you.
Yeah, things that even in this life, we don't have to do
Yeah,
this life.
right. No, yes, I've been playing with that actually revisioning circumstances that caused the trauma.
Yep.
Wow.
So I can tell a little bit more of the story of what happened afterwards. So
Yes, please.
It was actually pretty amazing, because what happened was that, so I mentioned that I had this girlfriend, and the amazing thing was, and I only realized it years later when I was trying to pinpoint the dates, but it turns out that she suddenly, after it broke apart, she wanted to come back, and she wasn't connected to everything I was going through. And so a whole year passed, and I was in this totally different space, and she wanted to reconnect, which was what I was hoping for and dreaming of. And then we couldn't find a day we could meet. Only a week. We had a week. We said, let's meet next Sunday. And that experience with those Jews and this crazy experience Friday night was just before that Sunday that I was supposed to meet her. And what happened was that I met her and I went into this very, very long rant about everything that I'm realizing and experiencing. And the bottom line was, I told her it's not out of the question that I may be a Baal Tshuva at some point. That's how we finished and then she said, it's too much for me. I can't handle this. And although I was dreaming for a whole year that she would want to resume this relationship, I felt that Hashem realized this is a pivotal moment, and he sort of poured all the craziest experiences. So in order to prevent me from going back basically to where I was, that's what would have happened. And even more amazing was that it wasn't a tragedy that she said it's too much from you, I can't handle it. And I felt that it's all for the best, all for the good. And I could start this journey. So there's another little miracle or experience that I had, which I think is also very powerful to share. And which was that I realized at some point that Judaism is not just ideas and experiences and learning and thinking about things in new ways. It was also practical, actions. And we shall do and we shall hear. And so I knew this, but I realized I need to do something. And so I was wondering, and I was sort of asking Hashem even, so what should be the first commandment that I should do? And then out of the blue, this neighbor of mine also started being excited about Judaism. And she comes to me with a siddur. She bought a siddur, and she shows me Shema Yisrael that you say before you go to bed. Shema, Kirat Shema Lamita. You say Shema Yisrael before you go to bed. And it's so beautiful, so wonderful. She was excited. And so I was smiling, but I told myself, this is a good thing to do. It's private. Nobody's looking. And what happened was that I bought a siddur. I went and bought a siddur for the first time, and I sat in my bed, and I opened it to the Shema Yisrael. I had to memorize. I never said it in my life. I never uttered those words.
Wow.
And then I sort of memorized them so I could cover my eyes and say them without looking at the siddur. And then I covered my eyes, and then I said them, and seriously, I don't have any mystical experience ever since then. This was it was a few months in which I had these concentrated experiences, and they're gone. I think this is also a very important thing about miracles and metamorphosis, that I'm very happy I don't have those experiences. I'm serious.
Why?
It was a boost, and now the rest of my life for me is building vessels to contain the lights that I had during those months or during that year. That's very much the counting of the Omer, by the way, that Pesach is this amazing light we can't even fathom, Passover. And then 7 weeks is just vessels and vessels. It's one night. And then you have 7 weeks of trying to contain that. So
can you just briefly, I know you have a lot more to say, but can you just briefly explain counting Sphera in case people are not, I'm sure.
well, just a second. I didn't say what happened when I covered my eyes. So I covered my eyes and I said, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And then again, I would never have believed this would have happened. But what happened was that I immediately had a vision. The vision was that I was in the desert. I was looking downwards at my 2 feet. My 2 feet were on the sand. And I didn't see what's around me because my head was buried in the ground. I could only see my 2 feet on the sand. And then I slowly lift up my head. And it's a whole desert. And then I see in the horizon, I see a whole long line, not a line, how do you say it? The whole shayara, a whole like an envoy of like a massive amount of people.
Train, I guess, call it. A train of people, I guess.
Like a train of people, like a whole, it was like the Exodus, basically. It was like the whole, but I distanced myself away from them for a little bit. I was a few, meters away from them, but I didn't know that because my head was in the ground. I was looking only at the tiny little radius of my own little world. And when I lifted it up, I realized there's this long chain that's going all the way back for millennia. And there's a little bit of a distance, just a little bit. My grandfather, my father, that's it. A little bit of a distance. And I'm reconnecting with this group of people that I had a connection with them, but I didn't know that. So that was crazy.
All living with the Torah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is really intense.
Now, I have to say two things. So one is about miracles and metamorphosis. I think that miracles are, when you get them, it's a miracle. You can't plan it. You can't design it. You can't, schedule it. It's a serendipity. It's something that happens out of nowhere. And it could be something very mystical. It could be something very, very small. But the thing is that the miracle is just a spark that gets you going. It's a bit like a game of Monopoly when you get a little money in the beginning. It's a loan. I think miracles are loans. We get them as a loan. We didn't merit them because we didn't do anything to deserve them. They happen. But I think that's how I think about those miracles. That was basically it. That was the few mystical experiences that I had.
Future self already did something at that point to
maybe
merit.
it was like a loan from a future self or from Hashem. And it was a kind of loan, and I have to pay it back. What I've been doing ever since for 20-something years now is trying to pay back the loan by studying and teaching and writing and doing whatever I need to do from my point of view as someone who grew up secular and became religious and has those languages and so on. But that's how I feel it is. And I still haven't paid it back because it's a massive, massive, massive loan. And, it's a loan that you pay back your entire life. That's the metamorphosis. That's what I liked about. I think you should think about miracle that happens to you as a loan. You got it because people believe in you. Hashem believes in you. Your future self believes in you. And now you have to justify it by translating that energy, converting it into action, into self-growth and helping others and helping the world and bettering the world, rectifying the world. And then you gradually pay off this beautiful loan. And it's a very satisfying thing to pay off a loan, that you feel that you're justifying what happened to you. So, yeah.
And why do you feel I'm not, it's beautiful. What you're saying is beautiful and powerful and profound. Wow. I'm just wondering, if we were just talking face to face, I would ask you, why do you not want more miracles? And I know that I've referenced a few times already a sikha that I learned from the Rebbe, a discourse from the Rebbe many times. Is from 1989, where Gimel Nisan, where he says that that basically the beginning of Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah of redemption and miracles, just like Tishrei is the Rosh Hashanah of the natural order. And that after 3,300, that 100 and whatever, 30, whatever.
Years.
Yeah. Plus every Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we receive another influx of potential for miracles. And it is imperative for us to actually use those miracles to activate them and to do miracles by our teva, by our nature. And he specifically says, he describes what is a miracle. A miracle is something that happens, according to the Baal Shem Tov, something that happens the first time, but once it happened, it's no longer a miracle, it's natural, but that we have to continue to go in on a regular, on a daily basis, and to do actual miracles by our nature in such a way that for us, it's natural, and for the people around us, it's miraculous. Like, how did you do that? And as a continuous process. Does that seem different from
what
you're
I meant? Yeah, what I meant was that I don't want to be this. What I meant was that I don't want more mystical, crazy experiences, because I feel that it would distract me from. I realized what I need to realize, and this connection was made. What you're describing from the Sikha of the Rebbe is that you're constantly, there's like an influx of supernatural light, divine light into the world that you constantly need to be connected to. That I absolutely try to keep that, channel open.
And it is connected also to Metamorphosis. I love that you love the title, because you get it. Miracles and Metamorphosis are intertwined 100%. So he also describes that we need to go beyond our nature. And every time we go beyond our nature, he doesn't use these words, but we're stepping into the unknown, stepping into the quantum. That's the metamorphosis, to go beyond our nature, to find, new light. Like you did, you went completely beyond your nature, lech lecha, beyond your upbringing, beyond your parents' experience, your culture. But that it should be on a continuous basis, and that actually propels supernatural. And I think also that the supernatural is supposed to be natural. Like, you don't want it to distract you, because that took you out of your world, but we're moving into a place, I think, where the supernatural is part of our world, and more so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you asked, I think this connects to, you asked before about the Sefirot and this whole idea.
Yes.
And also something that it's like a gift to anyone who's watching now. They have this thing that I'm offering, so I should say something about this. So I think it really connects beautifully that to Sfirat Omer. So the counting of the Omer, on the surface, it's the 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuot, but on a deeper way, it's trying to integrate divine lights into our lives, or to integrate the supernatural into the natural, like you said, the miraculous into the natural.
Actually,
and the idea is that.
And now that I recall, you said that. Yeah. Okay. And that's when I asked you to explain it, because I hadn't thought about it that way. Okay.
Yeah. That Passover is not just the Seder night, and it's not just the, commemorating the Exodus. It's, like you said, it's a new light. There's a new Exodus every year, and there's a new divine light that's coming into the world and trying basically to renew us, so that we become renewed. Rosh Chodeshim, it's the head of the Chodeshim, which are the moments of renewal.
Right.
And then the thing is that on the one hand, light is the most important thing, but unintegrated light is meaningless. It's lost. Right. And the counting of the Omer in a deep way is dedicating each day and the week. So it's this interconnected sort of model that takes the 7 divine channels, the 7 lower Sefirot, and it multiplies them one by the other, and you do 49 days of inter-inclusion. And it's this model that helps you take a very basic kind of faith that we have in Hashem, and a faith maybe in the Torah, and the faith in miracles, and faith in our soul, and break it down, unpack it into little packets of meaning that you can focus on each day. If it's something very vague and ethereal and ethereal, it's very powerful maybe, but it doesn't translate itself into a life of serving Hashem, or of constant evolution towards
exactly
Hashem.
right. Right. Yeah. That's what you're saying. Now I'm getting what you're saying. It's like you want to bring the light down, and you want to bring the light out, so that it's permanent, so that it merges heaven and earth in real ways.
Passover is revolutionary, and then the counting of the Omer is evolving towards that revolutionary state of mind.
Wow.
And then we get the Torah, and the Torah is the embodiment of taking the infinite light of Hashem and translating it into something that is finite and you can work with, and has particular details and letters and stories and actions and so on.
and yet transforms the entire nature of reality.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So for those who don't know, this is a sequence in the calendar that we start with Passover. We go through these 7 weeks, and then there's the holiday of Shavuot, which is the giving of the Torah. Wow.
Yeah.
So what is I've just posted the link, and it's also on, of course, on the speaker page. But what can you explain what this is? This course?
Yeah. So a few years during COVID time, we were all at home, and it was just, if you remember, just before Passover, between Purim and Passover.
I remember.
And then I said I have to, and I also had another medical issue going on at the same time. It was crazy. The world was going crazy with COVID, and I had another thing that I had to deal with. And I said I have to do something more than what I'm doing.
Oh.
And then I said a little bit before Passover, I said, well, I had a WhatsApp group. I'm going to send a daily message for the counting of the Omer. And I told everyone, and it blew up in a way I couldn't believe. Within the second week, I had like 2,000 people in that group.
Wow.
And I would send them that daily message. And I did that for those 49, 50 days. There was a one for the final one as well. And the response was just amazing. As this was going on, someone came by and translated it into English. Someone came by, translated it into Russian, French. It was just, it was all because of COVID.
Wow.
And then the year later, I put it as an ebook. So what I'm doing now is that for everyone else, I sell it, but here you have a coupon, Miracle. So if you're here and you're watching this, you get it for free. If you sign up, so it's no money, and you get the ebook with an introduction to the whole counting of the Omer concept and the model of the Sfirot and the 50 messages, and there's a link to a WhatsApp group. You can get the messages every day. The message for that day.
That's beautiful. And I'm assuming that this is these energies and these lessons are applicable to people, whatever their background is, Jewish or not.
Yeah,
Jewish.
absolutely. I wrote this, and this is basically my life's mission: is to explain the Hasidic concepts to people coming from my background. People have zero background, so it's all explained. Every week has a topic. So the first week is relationships, and the second week, which is now ending, is about inner work. And the third one is about art and creativity. And then there's one about education, and there's one about prayer, and there's one about finding your mission. And the final week is about rectifying the world. And then each week has 7 messages that take apart the 7 insights basically into that weekly topic. That's how it's built.
Amazing. Those are amazing applications of the Spheros. Somebody says, I don't know where to put the coupon in. Once you click, is it not obvious?
Yeah. So no, if you get to the page, you have to click, and then you get to all the links that I have, and then you click it's called 50 Shades of Light. That's how it's called. That's what you had to.
I just pasted that here, and it's also on the speaker page.
Yeah. So you click that, and you go to 50 Shades of Light, and then you go in, and then just before you pay, it says you can put on your coupon. If you look, maybe I should put my email as well. If someone can't find, it's a hard time. It's really, if you look again, you'll find it, I'm sure. This is my email in case you're
nice of you.
You have a hard time.
This is amazing. It's such a great first introduction. I can't wait to learn more of what you're doing and how you think. There is one question that somebody asked that I also have. So
there were so many questions. I couldn't concentrate on the.
I know that's been happening the whole time. I have to tell you very honestly, this group, I've done Summit since 2010. People are evolving. The level of consciousness, the level of, quite honestly, the level of the conversation here is people are relating from their own world experience. I had that when I had my near death. Oh, that's like when I.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very deep. And actually yesterday we had a speaker who had some tech problems, and he was running from place to place very graciously till he finally found a place that he could connect. But meanwhile, spontaneously, all the people who were on the chat went into this space of silence. And a few people said, wow, the silence feels so good.
Wow.
It was like there was some kind of, we're more deeply connected. I can't explain. It's something new. It's something new, and it seems to be happening really easily and really spontaneously. And it's kind of, the big events are exciting as the Geula unfolds, but in a way, this is almost more exciting. What happens in the evolution of consciousness, what happens as people are awakening, as we're realizing our intrinsic nature. You talked about connection between incarnations and times, but there's also the connection between souls. It's the same thing, really. And it's so present.
Yep. Yep.
So anyway, there were a lot of questions and I'm not able to keep up.
But do you have the transcript? Do you have the transcripts that I can, would you
We
have
don't
it?
have, we haven't been creating transcripts. We haven't got, we used to
Oh,
do
wow.
that a long time ago, but
Because maybe I should just quickly copy everything.
oh, of the Zoom? Oh, no, wait, yeah, you can copy it, or we're gonna
Yeah,
copy it.
transcript of the chat.
Transcript of the talk. We're not we used to.
No, of the chat.
Yes, you feel free to copy, and if you can't, you should be able to, but if you can't, I'm planning anyway to send the Zoom chat for each of the speakers, because it's been really amazing.
Oh, that would be great, because I would love to read what everyone wrote.
Yeah.
And it's not easily copyable
You can't
now.
track it. You can't copy it? Maybe I could copy it right now. And you have to enter credit card. Do you have to enter credit card info? People are asking before you put in the coupon.
No, afterwards. The coupon is before.
So then do they enter credit card info and pay nothing, or they don't have to? They're just questions about
yeah,
it.
if you put in the coupon, it's $0. So then you're just, so the credit card, maybe you do have to put it in because that's the technicality of it, but it doesn't charge you anything. Maybe, yeah, I never did this kind of totally free thing.
Yeah, it's fine. We're actually doing this. We're actually doing the same thing for people to put.
I think for technical reasons you have to put it because it's a dumb computer, so it needs you to get it. But it's $0, so it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Well, technically, I have a statement to make.
Mm-hmm.
If you put the coupon code and it goes to 0, you still have a PayPal button there. That won't work. That'll give you an error message because PayPal won't take 0 things. So you have to use a credit card.
Oh.
In order to get the 0 price, you have to use a credit card. If it was at 1 penny, PayPal would process it. But
okay, so I'll tell you what. If you don't have a credit card, it works. I didn't think about this. So if you don't have and the PayPal doesn't work, so again, I wrote my email address. I'm writing it here again. And so just write to me, tell me I was on the Shifra Hendrie podcast, whatever you call this, and I'll just add you manually to the group, and then you'll get it.
Awesome, that's awesome. Okay, this is the question. This has been super personal as well as super mystical and inspirational, educational, whatever. All that, but the question that somebody asked that I actually have been thinking the entire time is like, how are your parents dealing with this?
Yeah, that's everyone always asks that, and it makes sense. So, for my mother who grew up religious, the opposition fell very quickly. So very quickly she was reconnected in some way. My father that was the complex issue. And there's actually a beautiful little story. So my father was very, very angry and afraid of this whole thing when he realized this is where it was going. And I realized at some point that he is really more afraid than angry, and he's afraid that I will lose touch.
Yeah.
He heard about He was a journalist. He heard about extreme, yellow journalism sort of stories which exist. I've never met them, but I know they exist, of people who disconnected from their families. And when I realized that, I told him, no way. Not only do I love you, but I also now have the commandment to honor you. So forget about it. I'm not going anywhere. And
That's
nice. I made a point of coming every, second or third Shabbat to my parents' home, and they would watch TV and I would do Kiddush, and it gradually resolved. But the beautiful little story is that my father was a celebrity in Israel, and he had this kind of iconic look, and his look, he was quite big, and he had this kind of a little hat, like a Greek hat. It was a bohemian kind of type, and he had this kind of hat. And what happened was that I wanted to start putting on something over my head to say the blessings. And I couldn't put any kippah. I didn't, not a black kippah or a woolen kippah or nothing fit because I don't belong to any group. And then it hit me at some point, well, what does a Jew wear on his head? He wears what his father wears. So my father had about 30 of those hats. And I asked him if I can take one. And he said, okay. He didn't realize where this was going. And I took one and I took it home and I stood in front of the mirror and I sort of put it on until I got used to it. And then I started walking around with it in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And then I came home and I had a little bit of a beard, short beard. And I put this on. He also has a beard. And I come in and he looks at me. And then this was a very, very weird experience because on the one hand, it was very clear that I put on the hat because I'm becoming observant. And on the other hand, it was his hat and I looked more like him.
Right.
So are you becoming another person or are you becoming me? Are you distancing yourself or are you becoming nearer to me, closer to me? And he just burst out laughing and was the best icebreaker in the world. And he realized it was like the best thing. And what I learned from this, and I teach other Balei Tshuva, is that this was a very particular thing that I could do that had to do with my father. But if you find a way, as you're distancing yourself, on another level, you have to come closer. And that balances it out. You have to you have to be more close than you were before. And that makes up for you distancing yourself. And that's what happened in one item of clothing that I just put on. And the continuation of the story is that a year later, I wanted to get rid of the hat and put on an actual kippah because it was too vague by then.
I see you're not wearing that anymore.
And now I have another hat. I have a Hasidic hat. But I wanted to move to a kippah because I wanted to be more clear about where I was. I wanted the vagueness for a year, but then the head
covering is symbolic of the level of observance.
It's like coming out of the closet as fruit.
Yeah, right.
So then I spoke to my father on the phone, and I was walking in Yerushalayim, and we spoke on the phone. And then he said, "What's going on?" And I told him, to be honest, I really want to become more in the way I dress. I want to put on a kippah. I want to take off the hat and I put on a kippah, but I'm afraid of what people would say. And when he heard that, he said, and this is untranslatable a little bit, but he said, "What?" And then he says, in Hebrew, it goes, "Shekulam yikfetzu lecha." He says, who cares what they say, It's like, you can only say it in a rude way in English, which I don't want to say. It's like, don't think about them. And do whatever you want. It was almost like giving me his blessing. It was like the mirror image of he was saying me, go and do your thing. And he was giving me his kind of very secular, very individualistic, rebellious kind of energy and giving it to me as a blessing to go my path, which was definitely not his path.
So beautiful.
And he was, so that was very nice.
It happens so much, but what a spectacular story. Okay. I guess I'll just let me repeat one more time. If you can't, somebody already went in and checked out without the coupon and now asked if she can get a refund. This might be complicated for you. We might want to take the link off, although I put it in the chat and just have people just replace it with your email and have you put people on the WhatsApp, unless you're going to deal with it.
Well, the link also has my email in it. So that link, you can contact me via WhatsApp. If you have that link, it's like the link of all links. It's one link to rule them all. So that link has my YouTube channel and my WhatsApp and my email and everything in it. So if you have that link, you can contact them. You can contact me.
Okay, so that sounds like if it goes easy, just make sure to put in the coupon code.
Yeah.
Unless you want to pay for it, which is also going to support Torah learning in all kinds of places.
It's $18, by the way. It's not a big deal, but I wanted it to be a gift for your people.
That's beautiful. And otherwise, just email Rabbi Nir. And thanks so much. It was awesome.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you finally and chatting with you.
Okay, to be continued. Okay, everybody, we'll see you tomorrow bright and early.